Listeners at home, in continuation of our program Teaching and Learning on Radio, we shall be bringing to your doorstep agriculture, and our instructor this time is going to be Stephen Gia.
Good day, my fellow listeners at home. My name is Mr. Stephen Yisa, and the subject we are considering today is agricultural science. The topic of our discussion today is weeds and weed control. The objective we are expecting at the end of the lesson at home, as we sit back to listen, is that by the end of this lesson we should be able to give definition of weeds, types of weeds, effects of weeds on crops and the economy, methods of controlling weeds. As we continue, I define weeds or give definition of weeds. Weed is defined as any plant that is growing where it is not expected to, or a plant growing out of place. For instance, when we talk of weeds in our environments at home, there are plants that grow during or after rainy season, which is not planted by anyone. That is a typical example of what we mean by a weed. Another instance, a farmer that cultivates a piece of land, that is prepare land, made his ridges and plant maize. While the maize germinates, other plants grow along with the weeds. Those plants are what we refer to as a weed. Furthermore, I give another definition of weed as a plant growing where it is not desired in such a way that it constitutes nuisance to man, livestock, and crops. In the first instance, I gave the definition of a weed. When they grow in our environments, why do we weed them? Because they serve as a problem to us, or part of problems to us. So we do away with them. In the aspect of livestock, you have a farm where you are growing or rearing your livestock. There are plants that grow around the farm which is not planted by you. As a result, they constitute nuisance to you. Maybe when you want to go into the farm, you have to lift your legs one after the other because you are expecting that reptiles will live in those plants that are growing when you do not plant them. Then in the aspect of crops, why does it serve as nuisance to crops? When you cultivated a piece of land, that is, you prepare your land, made your ridges and plant your crops, you never planted those crops. And so they start growing with your crops as they sprout out from the soil, that is the seedlings, and thereby competing with the plants that you originally planted on your ridges. That is another way it serves as a nuisance to your crops. Having understood the definition of weeds, we want to look at what are the types of these common weeds that are found in the farm that constitute nuisance to man, livestock, and the crops. One, we have Tridus, which is the common name, and then the botanical name is Tridus procumbens. Two, we have Bahama grass, which is the common name, and the botanical name is Cynodon dactylinum. Number three, we have stubborn weed, which is the common name, and the botanical name is called Cedar acuta. Number four, we have bush grass, which is the common name, and then the botanical name is called Amaranthus spinosus. Number five, we have northern gamba, which is Andropogon gaianus. Then number 6, we have spear grass, which is the common name, and then the botanical name is called Imperenta cylindrica. Number 7, which is Acumuna, which is the common name, and then Acuna utilis, which is the botanical name. These are few among the types of common weeds that are found on the farm. Having mentioned this, we want to look at the effects of weeds on crops and the economy. What are the effects that these weeds cause to the crops and the economy in general? 1. Weeds compete with crops for space. 2. Weeds compete with crops for sunlight. 3. Weeds compete with crops. Weeds harbor pests and diseases. Number 4. Losses in crop yield as a result of the effect of weed. And then lastly, number 5. Losses in income of the farmers. What do we mean by these effects in this regards of what I've mentioned? I take it again one after the other as I give more explanation to this effect of weeds to crops and the economy. Number 1 again, I say weeds compete with crops for space. When young crops is developing, weeds rapidly grow and suppress the crop, and the space which is needed for healthy growth is reduced. That is how weed have its effect on the competition of space with crops. Number 2, weeds compete with crops for sunlight. Weeds are capable of producing many large leaves which shade the crop seedlings and therefore reduce the amount of sunlight which is needed for the available photosynthesis for crops. Number 3, which is weed harbor pests and diseases. In this regard, weeds harbor pests and diseases by acting as hosts, that is, providing insects with food when crops are not available. When you plant your crops and weeds take over the crops, insects easily come to your farm, diseases easily troop in to your farm, thereby providing insects with food when the crops are not available. Then number 4, which is losses in crop yield. Combined competition with weeds to crops eventually will result in low yield of crops. When weeds attack your crops in the farm, you discover that when your crops are supposed to produce crops that are big in size, which is the yield, you discover the reduction of the seed will come up as a result of the effect of weeds that is affecting that particular crop. Losses in the income of the farmers. Low yield coupled with the reduction in quality of produce increase the cost of controlling the weeds, which leads to the loss in the income of the farmer, where the farmer planted his crops and is estimating a large number of harvests. By the time he didn't take care of the farm in time, weeds can invade, and then that estimation he's having in his mind will be invaded by these crops, thereby reducing the quality of the crop that is supposed to get from that piece of land or farm. And that is why all the farmers work hard to prevent the weeds from invading their crops. Having said these effects of weeds, we want to look at when these weeds eventually invade our farms, how do we control them? Or in order to avoid the weeds taking over our crops or our farmlands, how do we take care of them? Number one of these methods, which is one, we have mechanical or physical method. Number two, we have biological control. Number three, we have cultural control. And then lastly, number four, we have chemical control. When we talk of these methods of controlling weed, what do we mean by the first one we have mentioned, which is the mechanical or physical control? One, when we talk of mechanical or physical control, we are talking about when there are weeds in our farm. We take measures such as hand picking or hand pulling of these weeds out of our farm. Number two, which is still part of mechanical or physical method, we carry out what is called weeding or hoeing, which is commonly known. By that method, we use our hoes in hoeing the weeds out of the farmland, that is, to carry out hoeing, to take care of the weeds. Number three, which is still part of the mechanical or physical method, we have slashing. This is simply the cutting of the airy part of the weeds using cutlass, thereby leaving the roots on the soil. That is what we mean by mechanical or physical control. Number two, when we talk of biological control, this involves the introduction of insects and herbivorous animals to farmlands to eat up the leaves of these weeds. The major problem with this method is that insects may start eating up the leaves when the weeds are being removed from the farmland. That is the effect of the biological method if it's going to be carried out on a farm to control weeds. Number three, which is the cultural method. This simply involves the practice of what we refer to as crop rotation and growth of cover crops to suppress the growth of weeds on the farmland. And when we talk of crop rotation, it means we planting different types of crops following a sequential order on a piece of land, so that a weed that is peculiar with a particular crop, by the time you plant a different crop next year, it will not have impact on that crop that is different from the one that is used to that particular crop. Then number four, which is the chemical control. This simply involves the use of chemical solution called herbicide to control the growth of weeds. Some of these herbicides are selected to specific types of weeds. Some killed part of the plant they fall on, which referred to as contact herbicide. Example of this chemical control, e.g., we have gramazone. 2, we have paracute. 3, we have simazone, etc. I want to be sure that at the end of this presentation I've given, our pupils that are at home should be able to carry out some of these objectives that are earlier stated, which has to do with definition of weeds. Number 2, which has to do with the types of weed. Number 3, which has to do with the effects of weed on crops and the economy. And lastly, the methods of controlling weeds. Having said all this, from the beginning of my presentation, I came up to define weeds as any plant growing where it is not expected to, or plant growing out of place. Furthermore, I define weed as any plant that is growing where it is not desired in a way that it constitutes nuisance to man, livestock, and crops. Having said that, I furthermore went ahead to mention 5 types of weeds that are commonly found on the farm, including their botanical names. Which one out of this we said is a Tridus, the common name, and then Tridus procumbens. Number 2, Bahama grass, which is Cynodon dactylon. Number 3, stubborn weed, which is a common name, and then the botanical name is Cedar acuta. 4, bush grass, which is the common name, and then Amaranthus tinosus, which is the botanical name. Number 5, I made mention of northern gamba, which is Andropogon gaianus. And then number 6, which is spear grass, Imperital cylindrica. And then lastly, mucuna, which is Mucuna utilicis, which is the botanical name. I equally went ahead to discuss or mention or state the effects of weed as thus. 1, I said they compete with crops for space. Number 2, weeds compete with crops for sunlight. Number 3, I said weeds harbor pests and diseases. And then number 4, I said losses in crop yield. And then lastly, number 5, I said losses in income of the farmer out of numerous number of the effects of weeds we have. And then lastly, I talked about the methods of controlling weeds. Which one? We said we have mechanical or physical control. Number 2, we have biological control. Number 3, we have cultural method. And lastly, number 4, we have chemical methods. All that involved in these types of methods have been explained earlier. As I conclude, the students that are sitting back at home listening to me, an assignment is here for you to make a try at home, which is for you to mention 10 types of weed aside the ones mentioned at the course of this presentation. And for the purpose of further clarification, I would like to recommend this textbook, which we should go and look at for further explanation, which is Agricultural Science textbook for junior secondary schools, especially the one written by Stans. For more inquiry, you can join us on WhatsApp on these numbers 09029282040 or 09029282040.